The Shining is a 1980s psychological horror film produced and directed by Stanley Kubrick and based upon Stephen King's 1977 novel of the same name. The movie stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers, and Danny Lloyd. This is the first part in a two-part series on the costumes of The Shining. Because of a recent rewatch of The Shining, I understand why this 40-year-old film still stands as one of the best horror adaptations of all time. Visually stunning, the costumes are designed by Italian costume designer and four-time Oscar winner Milena Canonero, a rock star in her own field. You will likely know Canonero's other work with Kubrick, including A Clockwork Orange and Barry Lyndon, for which she won her first Academy Award in Best Costume Design. She has spoken very positively about her experience working with the late Stanley Kubrick. Fun fact, if you saw my video on Star Wars, you might recall that costume designer John Mallow, who won an Oscar for that movie, was the historical advisor on Barry Lyndon, himself a respected author on European and American uniforms. Canonero went on to work on a boatload of other critically acclaimed movies like Out of Africa and Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, for which I will be doing a costume review in the near future. She also costumed several Wes Anderson productions, including The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, The Darjeeling Limited, one of my personal favorites, The Grand Budapest Hotel, for which she won her fourth Oscar, and the soon-to-be-released The French Dispatch. At 74, she is still going strong. And I know that there's lots of conspiracy theories about the movie, some of them more outrageous than others, but you won't be finding them here. And the reason that I don't believe many of the theories, where the costumes are concerned at least, say for instance with Danny's Apollo 11 sweater, is that I don't personally believe that Stanley Kubrick micromanaged the wardrobe department. For me, this is confirmed in a behind-the-scenes interview that the costume designer gave, where she said that while Kubrick gave her some direction on the costumes, he did not really tell her how the characters should dress. For ease of analysis, I've broken the video series up into 3 timelines, and I've created chapters, so feel free to skip to your area of interest. I haven't read the book. I do touch upon it a few times, so if you haven't seen this movie, there are major spoilers here. It cannot be helped. I know this is out of order from the film, but I thought that the best way to tackle the Shining story was chronologically. There's this supernatural element to The Shining, where the film's protagonist, Jack Torrance, depending upon how you interpret it, is thrust into an alternative timeline of the 1920s. If we are to go by the black and white photo of the Overlook Hotel, the scene takes place in 1921 during the July 4th ball. I had originally thought that Kubrick created this photo using the extras from the movie, but while doing research, I discovered that actor Jack Nicholson was actually composited into the black and white photo. Canonero hasn't stated as much, but from what I can tell, she used this photo as a launching pad for the costumes in that scene. And while it's not featured in the black and white picture, the gold room is decorated appropriately for a 4th of July party. As Jack walks toward the bar, all of the guests are dressed in evening finery appropriate for such a celebration. One of the first things that I noticed, and just like how they are pictured in the black and white photo, some of the men, usually older gentlemen, are dressed in white tie and tails, while the younger, less formal men featured are dressed in black tie. It matches with the photo, sort of a 50-50 split of white tie and black tie. For some historical context, Gentleman's Gazette stated on their blog that during the 1920s, the white waistcoat had come to be considered the most formal color because, unlike its ebony counterpart, it required frequent laundering and starching and therefore more expensive. They also stated that a stylish mode for the white waistcoat was the straight-line tub fashion that had been revived in America in 1921. This contrasts to the points we often see in men's waistcoats earlier in the century. The black tie and short coat style would eventually overtake the more formal fashion going into the 30s and 40s. You might notice as well that many of the men are wearing a white or clove red boutonniere, French for buttonhole. The most popular flower in that era would have been a carnation, with white being the most formal. This was a popular fashion trend for men at the time and something that you see worn with wedding attire even to this day. And also like the photo, women in the scene are dressed in beaded and sleeveless flapper-style dresses with headbands and flower crown headdresses and long strands of pearls. Stanley Kubrick's daughter Vivian, pictured standing behind Jack Nicholson, served as an extra for this scene. This is her sitting on the right in a beaded black dress with the cigarette holder. The Victoria and Albert Museum stated that nightlife became the focus for the exuberance of the years after the First World War. It gave birth to the most glamorous evening fashions of the 20th century. Evening dresses of the early 1920s were sleeveless, long, and feminine. They were gathered on the hip or the back. According to the V&A, this Coco Chanel evening dress of the early 1920s illustrates the transition between the romantic picture dress with its wide skirt and the more cubist straight and square shape of the mid-1920s. The waitstaff in the scene all dress in black tie and tails with white gloves. These photos from the early 1920s show waiters dressed in a similar fashion. Most notably, we see this style with Delbert Grady, the 1970s caretaker, who in this 1920s setting is now a waiter. His outfit is in keeping with the other waitstaff. He wears a black scoop front waistcoat, a white shirt with wingtip collar and French cuffs, and toe-cap shoes. I saw it mentioned online that in the black and white photo, Jack is wearing Grady's outfit, but Jack is either wearing a cutaway coat or straight-up tuxedo jacket instead of the tails that we see here. And I'm saying this because his jacket appears to be fastened, something that's impossible to do with a tailcoat. This is confirmed by Pixar director Lee Unkrich, otherwise known as the caretaker at the Overlook Hotel Tumblr account, who stated that only Nicholson's head, collar, and bow tie were composited onto the original photo. In the Gold Room, the bartending staff, like Lloyd, dress in crop jackets with deep notched satin lapels, black scooped waistcoats, and tuxedo pants, but again with the wingtip collar and black tie. The burgundy color matches that of Jack's corduroy jacket. I will get to that a little bit later, but it's also in keeping with the pink velvet chairs and the warm cherrywood bar. When I first saw Lloyd's jacket, I was certain it was velvet, but it's also possible that it's a fine wool. Actor Joe Turkel sports a slicked-down center part, which was a very fashionable hairstyle for men, although side parts were common too. As a side note, you might recognize Turkel from his role as Eldon Tyrell in Blade Runner, seen here in the comfiest of robes of all time. I have a video on his costumes if you want to check it out. When he comes across this scene, which I believe belongs in this section as well. Given the formal dress of the character on the right, I have decided that this ghost also comes from the 1920s. While I haven't read the book, I understand that he is a featured character, and the man dressed as a bear is dressed in the book as a dog instead. Again, lots of theories out there, but when I saw this scene, and maybe because the BBC series was released the following year, it reminded me of the character of Sebastian and his teddy bear Aloysius from Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. I'm not saying there is a connection, just something that popped into my mind. The Grady daughters, butchered in the winter of 1970 by their father Delbert Grady, appear to Danny in visions throughout the movie. In the film's dialogue, the character, Stuart Ullman, says he thinks they were about 8 and 10. The Grady daughters were played by identical twins Louise and Lisa Burns, and the subject of parody in pop culture. It's been suggested that Stanley Kubrick took influence from this famous photo. Identical Twins, Roselle, New Jersey, by U.S. photographer Diane Arbus, although Kubrick's widow denies it. The photo depicts 7-year-old twins Kathleen and Colleen Wade standing side by side in matching corduroy dresses, white tights, and white headbands in their dark hair. For me, it's too much of a coincidence to ignore because Kubrick not only met Diane Arbus, but also studied under her while he was a young photographer at Look magazine. However, it was also very common for sisters or even mother and daughters to dress alike. This style of dress, I believe, is much earlier than 1970. If we look at these catalog pictures from 1960, the powder blue dresses, white socks, and black patent leather Mary Janes are from at least a decade earlier. Perhaps the designer chose this silhouette because it comes across more disturbing than the late 1960s. As to the age of the Grady daughters, were they meant to be 8 and 10 as stated by Stuart Ullman, or twins like they are with the casting? I think that the answer is clear seeing the costumes on display, and while they cast twin girls, they tried to show their ages as 8 and 10 by way of the costumes. The dress displayed on the right is shorter than the one on the left, and you can see in this picture that the Grady daughter on the right, that her dress is shorter, because traditionally, younger girls typically had shorter dresses than older girls did. This is also a practical effect, commonly used by theater and film costumers as a way to trick your eye. It also appears that she was slightly smaller or standing just slightly behind her twin on the left. And here are a few close-ups of the dresses. The fabric appears to be a dotted Swiss cotton or linen, a very popular fabric used in children's clothing even to this day. And here are some good pictures of the socks and black patent leather shoes. For the bloody massacre scene, according to the caretaker, real-life twins Louise and Lisa Burns recall being asked to lie down in the hallway set, and that the blood Kensington gore, which was a trademark for fake blood used in film and theater, was poured over them from a jug. Neither remembers being particularly bothered by the nature of the scene. Of the very few interviews that costume designer Milena Canonero gave, she said in the documentary, View from the Overlook, Crafting the Shining, one thing put me in the right direction was the fact, Stanley Kubrick said, you want the people to look middle America. She said, I didn't want all the clothes to look too worn out or tired, and I decided that those characters were a little bit more like figurines from a catalog. I mean, in my mind, everything seemed to be so perfect. She added that, everything seems to be pristine, but what's underneath, all that everything that could be away from the horror. I tried to do anything that could not in a million years give indication of darkness. Danny Torrance is the son of Jack and Wendy Torrance, played by 6-year-old actor Danny Lloyd. Given what Canonero just said, Danny's color palette is all American in red, white, and blue, and stars and stripes like we see with his Bugs Bunny shirt. Many of his clothes are also in primary colors because they were highly popular at the time, especially for kids. And I like to think that his mother Wendy dresses Danny well as a sign of her love for him, but also in sunny bright colors as a way to protect him as well. You'll see that throughout the movie there are pop cultural influences in the decor and costumes, from Snoopy to Mickey Mouse and Winnie the Pooh. The 1970s catalogs are chock full of branded items. While we couldn't really imagine it any other way today, licensing of brand items really only began in the 1930s and 40s. In fact, the Looney Tunes property would ultimately become one of the most successful licensing programs of all time. Taking a note from what the costume designer said about the family, I looked to late 70s vintage catalogs. And with a hint from the caretaker, I discovered that a great deal of Danny's costumes, as you will see, are right out of the Sears 1977 Fall and Winter catalog. In case you didn't know, Sears was an affordable brand for middle-class families. It makes sense from a storytelling perspective that we would first meet Danny wearing a Bugs Bunny shirt, considering that his parents call him Doc, as in, "What's up, Doc?" And his shoes are these striped Oxfords by Toughskins. Many of Danny's costumes appear to be the Sears Toughskins brand, which were primarily marketed for their durability. According to the Sears archives, Toughskins debuted as a new blend of materials, including Dacron, nylon, and cotton. I think the shirt pictured here is this blue chambray shirt with epaulettes. It appears to match Danny's shirt from the Stanley Kubrick archives at the University of Arts, London. And just to make things a bit easy for me, I discovered on a nearby page this Toughskins belt with buckle. So you can see what it looks like close up. Here is a vintage Toughskins belt buckle that I found on Etsy. And while Danny's jacket appears to be blue with red accents, at least that's what I thought when I first saw it, this jacket is actually blue and orange, like we see here in this vintage Philadelphia Flyers starter script jacket. And I have no idea why Danny might be a Flyers fan. If you know why, please leave a comment below. Another pair of Danny's shoes are these Pooh and Tigger portrait shoes. The original pair currently live at the Kubrick Archive in London. And one of Danny's most iconic outfits, of course, is this look while he's riding his big wheel down the halls of the Overlook Hotel. Danny's tartan blue shirt appears to be this one from the Sears catalog. Here it is in the Kubrick archives looking practically new, so maybe there is something to this Toughskin brand, or perhaps keeping it wrapped in acid-free tissue paper has kept it protected all these years. While I couldn't find it in the catalog, his overalls look similar to these blue denim Toughskins with white stitching. And his shoes look like red Converse. What's funny, or not so funny, about this shot is that we get a very tight close-up of Danny here when he first sees the Grady daughters. I thought that his red hoodie might be this one. And I'm almost certain that the shirt is this red, white, and blue check Western style shirt, again with all the American colors. But what surprised and delighted me was that the blue sweatshirt he is wearing is actually this one. But of course, we had no idea because Danny is so tightly framed in the shot. I just love the idea that Wendy would choose this sweatshirt for him because they are clearly very close. Another jacket that I discovered through the archives is this one, and it's also in the Sears catalog. But like me, you might wonder, when was Danny wearing that jacket? Well, because of the near whiteout conditions, you can barely make it out. You will, however, remember Danny in the maze the first time, and I'm pretty certain that he is wearing this plaid CPO jacket. Here is the red plaid shirt, but unfortunately I couldn't find his Mickey Mouse sweater. I did find some Disney licensed Mickey Mouse boys tops, so it appears they were popular in the late 70s. Danny's blue Apollo 11 sweater is much talked about. In 1969, Apollo 11 was the space flight that first landed humans on the moon. The sweater was apparently knitted by a friend of costume designer Milena Canonero. Leon Vitali, who was personal assistant of Stanley Kubrick at the time, said in a 2017 interview in The Guardian that Canonero thought the sweater was just the sort of thing that a kid that age would have liked. As you can see by this vintage knitting pattern, these brightly hued sweaters appear to have been a popular item for children in the late 70s. In the Sears catalog, I found other rocket-themed sweaters. There were likely multiple sweaters made for Danny because in this scene, his sweater is ripped at the shoulder. After production wrapped, Danny's screen-accurate sweater was purchased by first assistant editor Gil Smith, who bought it for her nephew. After he grew out of it, the sweater was returned to her and it remained in her possession for the next 30 years. According to the Kubrick archives, it's now owned by the caretaker. Late in the movie, Danny wears red pajamas. I'm pretty sure that it's the Winnie the Pooh fleece sleeper that we see in the catalog. Unfortunately, I couldn't find this brown terry towel bathrobe. Danny's last costume that brings us to where the final, terrifying ending is this wool sweater with another tartan print shirt and pants. As I've mentioned in this video, I wanted to let you know that while there is a Stanley Kubrick archive at the University of the Arts London, some of you might have seen the exhibit when it toured. There is no digital archive readily available online that I'm aware of, which has made doing research on this film very difficult. So if you have some spare time on your hands, perhaps you can send an email and request that they digitize the archives and make them available to the public at large and not boxed up and housed in a warehouse like something out of Raiders of the Lost Ark. If you're still with me, I will have part 2 for you shortly, and in that video, I will explore the costumes of both Wendy and Jack Torrance. You don't want to miss that. So until then, I'll see you in the next video.